So nominalism is the idea that there are only names to things, not essences. So there's no human nature, there's no dog nature. When we talk about natures or classes or sets of things, we're not giving an ontological or metaphysical status. We're just simply classing things together linguistically in a set. The Middle Ages and the ancient world, the time of Paul or the church fathers, they thought very differently. They thought that things have natures, they have essences. And so the words aren't just terms or nominal nameism. They actually describe what's really there in them metaphysically. Okay. So there is human nature. And in Orthodox theology, Christ assumes...
Who would deny that?
In the Middle Ages, it begins with people like William of Ockham. So Ockham is the first nominalist. And
the man with the razor.
Exactly. He's known for that. And he challenges some kind of established ideas of like essential. It's called essentialism, that things have essences. And so he also goes up against this idea of universals, that there's no such thing as a universal class or essence of a thing. And that had been kind of the norm since Plato and Aristotle as well. But so you get a denial of essentialism and essences, and then you get another guy named Gabriel Biel, and he's very influential on Martin Luther. And so when the Reformation kicks off, there's this debate about how could you be called righteous if you're not in fact righteous. So if as a human being you are, menstrual rags, as Isaiah says, as the Reformers said, then how could God call you righteous without being a liar? Well, enter in nominalism, and nominalism is able to say, because things don't actually have essences, they just have names. And so if God calls you that, you are that legally, even though in actual fact you're wicked. So that was, and Luther was very happy to utilize that nominalistic approach. And by the way, this is not just my theory. There's famous Lutheran scholars. There's a book called Harvest of Medieval Theology by Heiko Obermann. And the whole thesis of that book by a Lutheran is that, Luther had to use nominalism. So we're also, though, moving away, not just from theological squabbles, but the idea that things have natures. And this is how we get to David Hume and Kant and these Enlightenment figures, which give us the, scientific revolution, supposedly. This is how we get to there's no male and female. So you can see kind of the logical train here. If things don't have essences, well, then they don't actually have genders, right? Objectively, because everything is just a name. So I can just name myself he, him, zer, z.
What this philosophical notion from Platonism says is that for a thing to be a thing, it doesn't have to only be defined by the characteristics that are apparent to it or that we perceive it to have in terms of empiricism. So if a thing, say, is me, my skin is white or pinkish, whatever you want to call it, kind of sort of badly tanned, half tanned. I'm partly brown, right? I have blue eyes, right? And I have a soul and so forth, right? So none of these particular characteristics of me are just applicable to me, right? Their brownness is something that sort of occurs in other instances in nature, right? It goes beyond just one instantiation. But I'm also unique in that I possess brownness in this specific, right, case. This is my brownness. This is my blue eyes, right? And what happens is when Aristotle sort of becomes preeminent in philosophy, ultimately in the West, the time of the Middle Ages, Aristotle says, no, we got to get rid of that. We need a different philosophical, metaphysical conception of what it is for a thing to be a thing. And he proposes the idea of what's called hylomorphism. Now, this all may sound a little obscure and highfalutin and all that, but it actually is relevant because it's actually going to play into economics and social order. So that's the argument I'm going to make here. So when Aristotle comes along and says, now we need hylomorphism, what that is he says, all right, we have things out there in the world, and they do have essences. So you're right about that, Plato. But their essences are not participating in all these different essences out there, redness, all and so forth. The essence of a thing is really just its matter and its form, right? So basically, he's collapsing form or anything transcendent, if you will, into the thing itself, right? And when you do that, because of the notion that Aristotle has of simplicity, what that must mean in terms of prima materia, or that an object is made up of prime matter, the material cause, he calls it, it can only have one form, right? So you can only be you, and if we're speaking in terms of humans here, it has to be a body and a soul, right? That's the being or the essence of a body, or of a person, excuse me, is the composite of body and soul. And so what he says is that a substantial form, is what we're calling this, is a simple unified atomic unit, is a good way to think of it. So there's not another you out there, and the you that's you is not participating in anything else, because the brownness or the whiteness or whatever, if you've got white hair, if you've got blue eyes, those characteristics, Aristotle says, those are just secondary, right? They're just accidental, he says. Not accident in the sense of like happenstance or a wreck, but accidental in the sense of not being essential to you. So if all those characteristics are accidental or secondary, as they would be called in the Enlightenment, then things are only what they are, is basically what we get from this, right? And ultimately this means that the blueness, redness, whiteness, all these sensuous properties of a thing are really just, they're able to be discarded, basically. They're not necessary. The medieval theologians would use this whole scheme to try to figure out how in the Mass the bread and wine are transubstantiated into the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ, right? So this is where this starts to become useful in terms of social theory and medieval Catholic theology. Now,
that's substance versus form.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So in the Mass, when the priest prays over the bread and wine, it retains the accidents of bread and wine, but the substance is become body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. Right. So this is the medieval doctrine of transubstantiation for Roman Catholic theology. Now, so we've discarded older Platonic ideas of metexis, right, where multiple things can participate in multiple essences without losing their identity as unique or particular. So now what we've done is collapse anything transcendent into the here and the now. And that means that the characteristics that a thing has basically are just made up of the sum of its parts, right? So what is a thing? Well, it's prime matter plus color, solidity, shape, form, etc. That's all a thing is. The thing is that thing. So that book over there has no connection to other books other than that it's a book. And what happens in Western philosophy is that this becomes eventually empiricism and nominalism. Actually, nominalism is prior to empiricism. But what this means is that the things that we talk about in the world, when we're ascribing these properties and characteristics to a thing, they're just names, completely human token inventions, social constructs. The objects in the world don't actually possess these things. They're just names given to sensuous qualities that we perceive about objects in the world. All right. Now, it's not by accident that by this time in the West, economic theory and political theory have transitioned out of older medieval notions of, say, the chain of being idea, where you have hierarchy, everything in its place, you're born in a certain class, etc., etc. Now everything is supposedly under, quote, revolution, right? Protestant Revolution, Reformation, Scientific Revolution, Reformation, humanism, Renaissance, which birthed humanism, so forth and so on. All of these revolutions come about. And what these revolutions are is a revolution based on some of the philosophical principles and ideas that I'm outlining, much of which has to do with the transition away from metaphysics and objective metaphysical principles and essences into empiricism, and that's what comes to dominate the modern world in terms of its ideology as a whole. And empiricism gives rise to relativism, and I would argue that in the market sphere, this is why we have the rise of neoliberal neoliberal economics and social Darwinian-based survival of the fittest, crony capitalism. It's really just sort of the ultimate apex flowering of all these philosophical ideas, and that's why I think philosophy is so important. So that may have been a little convoluted or a little difficult.
No, I see what you're getting at.
But I hope you get what I'm getting at, because what happens is when a thing is just a collection of its parts and doesn't have any transcendent reference or any reference to anything eternal beyond the here and the now, what happens is you begin to see everything that way. So in the market, the objects and humans are basically transmutable units of exchange and consumption, right? And this produces standardization and monoculture, right? So this is where we get Henry Ford going in and studying the scientific efficiency of how quick you can make this part, and how many people need to be in this row of in the factory, and how much time they have to work before they get too tired to keep working. So this obsession with quantification and efficiency.
Taylorism.
Excuse me.
Taylorism.
Yeah, exactly right. And so what do we get? What we get from this is then this. You can see why we would get globalization from this. Yeah. This becomes the same pop music in Korea, the same fast food everywhere.
McDonald's French fries everywhere.
Everywhere, right. So the collapse, to sum up, then the collapsing of the transcendent into the now in terms of social order basically means the removal by necessity within that system. It's inherent within that system to remove any notion or conception of ethnoi in the Greek, which is peoples or people groups. And it results in the loss of, I would say, ultimately tradition, history, culture, and meaning on a local level, which ironically, that was the very thing that it was intended to protect, the local guy's ability to engage the market and to make a profit and so forth, right? So, and I don't mean to be overly simplistic here. It's not like I have all the answers, or I think that it's not capitalism or socialism or communism. It's none of those things are perfect answers, because there aren't perfect answers. We live in a difficult world that doesn't work on idealisms. So, I personally, I do support local capitalism. I think local businesses should have the right to do what they do and to manufacture their products and to make a profit. There's nothing wrong with those things. But go ahead.
This is an important point, because I guess a market purist, or someone who defends the genuine free market, would say, might say, yes, this is true, but you can't look at the current situation and say that the stifling of local businesses by these large corporations is a market phenomenon, because people like outfits like Bain Capital, which create staples, get access to cheap capital via the Fed, and also some would say that Bain Capital has been used as a conduit for laundered drug money, to finance staples. Same thing with Walmart. I heard an interesting comment about Walmart regarding discussion about Jade Helm. The rumors regarding Jade Helm and Walmarts and all that stuff. And that aside, the skeptical interviewer said to Gay, well, I never thought Walmart was a free market operation anyway. You don't get that type of growth with such low margin retail operation. And within that growth has been rampant stock fraud and laundering for drug money. These chain outfits, that's one way to launder all the cash. And so I know what you're saying is what happens is this isn't a free market really operating anymore.
Oh, I understand that now, presently, we are not in a, quote, free market. I completely agree with that. And but
there are advantages to, economies of scale. But that's not what we're getting. Some would say, I read an article, the market would only tolerate a business of a certain size before it becomes inefficient and collapses. But you don't get big business until you get the idea of corporate personhood.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, right? So that's in itself is an intrusion on the market.
Which is a manifestation of what I was arguing philosophically,
Yeah,
is that
exactly.
you
So
can just
like
name a thing, and it becomes that thing,
yeah.
even though
And
it's
so-
not.
And so the destruction of say the local regional businesses and it's sort of its absorption into global corp,
Yeah.
or is a function of the very corrupt processes that we witnessed at Bilderberg.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's, I think, your point made in some of these articles. This they're not, John D. Rockefeller said himself. He said competition is a sin.
Yep.
Competition with him, and what Rockefeller represents is a whole ideology, which I think you're getting at with that explanation.
Yes.
Very useful explanation, by the way. This idea of this, I guess, a form of reductionism that occurs when you
Yes.
start to get away from this.
Yeah.
Does it play into pragmatism at all? American pragmatism?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I
That's
mean,
what I was thinking. Pragmatism.
the American experiment is really an experiment in. If we look at somebody like Bacon, Francis Bacon, and the American experiment is the scientific experiment. That's the real mystery of his, all that gobbledygook that people think about, the Atlantis and all that stuff. No, it's an experiment in Enlightenment scientism, and that ultimately does give rise to pragmatism, because if basically all we know is sense reality, which is what dominates our the global philosophy is empiricism, and if that's all the only means that we have for knowing things, then basically the phenomena of reality are phantasms, because they come and go, and they can be transmuted, named, changed, renamed at will. I think something like Caitlyn Jenner is a perfect example of this. I mean, if we have fiat, as I said in another interview, if we have fiat currency globally, which is just creating and naming a thing money when it isn't, then why not have fiat gender? I mean, we saw this with this NAACP fraud person who, white, says, well, I identify as black. I mean, this is a manifestation, I would argue, of this very ideology of bad philosophy playing out for our eyes, and it's ultimately a tool of the technocrats. But yeah, I mean, the market process. You make a good point there, that it's not about saying business itself is bad, or the idea of competition is bad, because that may sound like what I'm saying, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm just trying to give an analysis of where I think the West has gone in the last 1,000, 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And I think that the philosophical ideas play out in the market sphere as well. So does that mean I have all the answers? No. But I do think there's a valid criticism in persons like Rene Guénon and Reign of Quantity. That does not mean that I accept all of his ideology or his Sufism. I just think he makes good criticisms that are worth looking at, as well as somebody like Oswald Spengler. I do not agree with Spengler's cultural relativism, but he does make good criticisms.
So it's like Naomi Klein, who I don't really take as a real deep
exactly.
thinker,
Right.
but her idea of shock doctrine has validity.
Absolutely.